Shush me.
I'm gonna shush you.
Don't shush me.
All right.
Okay,
We're
okay,
here.
let's-
We're on.
Shush me, you rat bastard.
Maybe I will. Okay. All right. We're on.
Let's simmer down, everyone.
Welcome
Gotta act
to.
professional for the
You know what?
listeners.
You know what? I'm done.
Wow. Okay. This show's starting
Podcast over.
with what? Okay.
Call the warden. I want off this here prison moon.
I don't think you got a choice.
I'm taking the talking conch with me.
Welcome.
I think
Oh
you've still
no.
got a few years left on your sentence there.
Yeah,
Wyatt.
it's true.
Damn
You
it.
gotta
Damn
until
it.
we whittle this list down to 0.
You're stuck with us till
God,
2026.
it's like fucking what's that PS Vita game, Freedom Wars, where you have like 1,000-year sentence.
We
and you have to
cannot
fight
derail
monsters.
this early.
All right. Welcome to Prison Moon.
Yeah, welcome to Prison Moon. We talk about
Welcome,
albums.
welcome.
This is not a Death Grips album.
No.
It is
Wait,
an
it's
album
not?
it's an album in the grip of death.
God. Yeah. We're talking today about the record by UBOA, The Origin of My Depression. I'll put like a blanket warning right now. It's gonna get heavy. So if you're not down for that,
This is
Dip out.
We have themes of depression and very likely suicide on this album.
yeah, as well as
So
stuff like transphobia and stuff like that.
yeah.
So
If you made it through the actual album, which you should if you're listening to the show, then you should probably be fine. But
yeah,
if you're one of those weirdos who just listens to the show and not the album because you love us so much, this is your warning.
yeah. All right. So, let's
Start
just
us off.
let's do. No, you start us off. What are your
All
what are
right.
your thoughts on this? How
This is an intense album.
yeah.
It's just it's unrelenting, intense. It is just like yeah, I don't feel like I can competently express like just how raw and emotional the vast majority of this album is, like just from start to finish.
Yeah. Peter, how
In
about oh,
in a sentence, it's very rough out here.
Real
I
rough.
guess, yeah. Yeah, you take it, Peter.
Yeah. So I talked about this a little bit when we did our albums of the year episode. That music's not always fun, and sometimes really, really good albums are like painful, and they hold artistic merit outside of how much you enjoy them. And I think this is definitely one of those. That's a very worthwhile experience without being much fun. It's very intense, very heavy and very personal. And yeah, I knew nothing about this artist going into this, and just listening to the album made me go back and look up some of her history. First of all, I assumed UBOA was a group, which it's not. It's a solo artist.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think knowing that this is a Australian trans woman who is obviously suffering through her art adds a whole lot to this listening experience.
for sure. Yeah, I had the same, like when I listened to this for the first time, I had pretty much the same reaction of you as like, holy shit, I need to know more about this. And yeah. So this is one of my favorite records. And I'm glad we get to talk about it here because it is, I think, like you said, it's not a fun listen, but there is so much to be gleaned from listening to this, and there's so much emotional potency and also just artistic depth to what's being done here. And intentional or no, I don't think it matters. Like it's so, everything here is so representative of the emotions that it seems to be trying to represent, and it's horrifying at times. Like, it's genuinely like this. I'm trying to think. This might be the first time I ever like cried listening to music. It's intense. This is also like extremely formative for my taste in music, because it is one of the first albums that I listened to, and I'm like, I am not.
This came out 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, like, I got into music fully like 2.5 years ago. So
Oh wow.
He's just a boy, Peter. Cut him
Yeah.
some
Right.
slack.
It's hard to forget because you know so many celebrities.
Aw.
I
It's a teaser for the pre-show if you're not a Patreon subscriber.
damn. But yeah, this is like, it got me into far more experimental music, more like noise music, and just there's a whole bunch of different sounds and aesthetics here that are being so seamlessly or intentionally, like jarringly, put together to make this piece that is so cohesive and so just artistically potent. Yeah, I absolutely adore this record. And I'll get more into why as we go through. I have basically no jokes for you, Wyatt. What do you think about the first track, Detransitioning?
It's a remarkable entry into the horrifying journey that is this album. I, I don't want to use the word gentle because it's not at all accurate, but this is maybe the most gentle entry in that you could possibly get. Like, out of any of these other tracks, I don't think any one of them is a. They're far more harsher overall, and so this is the one that is probably the least off-putting.
Yeah.
Immediately, you know, like
You're totally right. When I
it gets you in there.
When I listened to this album for the first time, someone just like posted it somewhere, and I like clicked it, and I like skimmed through, and all I heard was the more ambient parts.
Mm-hmm.
So this track as a whole thing was like, okay, this is exactly what I expected, which made some of the later parts incredibly shocking for me, let's say. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and it's also beautiful as well. Like it's just like, I don't know. A lot of the tracks on this album are quite long, and for the strength of that is that you can kind of play around with different sounds on a single track, and like this one does open quite gently. I know the title is Detransitioning, but it is a bit of a transition into, you know, what the rest of this album is. So I think it really works as an opening track to that extent, but just it's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Which is true of almost everything on here. But yeah, I mean, if you, yeah, I tend to consider an opening track to be successful if it like introduces the album as like a piece of like a set of music to you. But I feel like what this one does better is introduce the album as an emotion. And if you're not sold on the emotion on display in this first track, like, you know, you're not gonna get
it
much
while
out of
you
the rest of the
can,
album.
right? Like,
Yeah, this is kind of like a,
it's
you
basically
know,
just like the content
what's the phrase? Not to like abandon all hope, you enter here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really astounding track on a really astounding album. How about you, Peter?
I definitely think, excuse me, um, I definitely think it does a phenomenal job of easing you into some of the more harsh meat of this album. Because it does start off very ambient. Um, it's almost just like these um, like twinkling clean piano notes. That's just like a few notes, and like UBOA layering her voice and like really stretching these notes and having these really like subtle cracks that kind of they show the vulnerability of it. And yeah, it's just really like gentle, but you can feel her pain. And yeah, I did not have that easy of a time picking out the lyrics here, but if you look them up, um it's pretty straightforward. I'm just a girl trying her best, ugly as sin. A glimmer of hope stamped out by those not listening. Um, and then ideation, I did my best, please don't hurt me. And then just that repeated again.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like you can tell by this first track, this is not going to be an easy listen. Um, and she's really just like laying her soul bare for the listener. Um, and then the last bit of this track, um, new sounds come in. It starts getting cacophonous. Um, it starts getting noisy, and that like gentle pain becomes um, a more harsh and unbearable pain. And I just think this is a fantastic way to start a record.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, this particular kind of record for sure. It's not for everyone, but this is like um, this like entire album is like one piece, and this track is the opening and kind of like um, lowering you into the um, darkness.
Yeah. I think this is, like you said, pretty much just a perfect way to start this record. It starts with this super sparse and kind of arrhythmic piano playing, kind of off kilter octaves over. Please look this up. I'm fairly certain her name is Xandra. Um, that's what I wrote here, but if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Xandra
Her,
Metcalf.
okay, yes. And over her really quiet and kind of creaky voice, and gradually a couple more things start to come in. Some wind chimes start crowding up the sound a little bit, to the point where it starts to get nearly impossible to make out what she's saying, like you said, and then the all the instruments kind of fade away for the line "Please don't hurt me," and I think that's the point when I listened to this for the first time where I was like, okay, this is gonna be rough. After that point, we get these really beautifully dissonant choirs that start to gradually build up the soundscape as we get some of these more like kind of random creaking noises and other real world sounds mixing with these digital effects and this massive organ sounding instrument. And this build up leads to the end of the track where it reaches kind of a breaking point where harsh noise starts clipping in and out trying to get through. But it's still really beautiful because of the choir that's in the background, and now the real world sounds I was talking about before are now just this rhythmic rattling, and it just builds and builds, and it never quite climaxes. It goes all the way up. You can even hear right before it cuts her she's screaming, but it never hits the kind of emotional climaxes it does later on the record. Like you said, this is just a fantastic way to start a record, and this one specifically. Yeah. All right. Why? What do you think about the title track?
Oh man.
Yeah.
This is gonna be a comparison that is probably gonna be lost on what audience we have, but the musical environment of this track reminds me a lot of the like soundscape of Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, the game, which is a game about like a like essentially warrior during like the Viking era whose entire village has been destroyed, and she's struggling with psychosis, and hears voices in her head that whisper to her or scream at her, and that's what a lot of what we have going on here in the lyrics. This is kind of, I guess, monologue of sorts, listing all of the things that are not the origin of our speaker's depression. Notably, at the end of, I guess, the first verse, saying, "You are not the origin," which we then return to later in the song, whispering abated, now shifting into a full-throated, pained scream that proclaims, "You are the origin of my depression." And there are some like notes on here on the Genius page, but I kind of want to dismiss that. And the sentiment seems to be that like who the speaker is referring to is actually the origin of the depression, and they were either lying earlier or didn't want to accept it. I perceived it differently. I kind of imagine this environment being somebody looking into a mirror, and just the you in question is the speaker themselves.
Yeah.
So when that painful admission comes near the end of the song, I think that is directed inward, and I think that really does a lot to amplify the emotion and the tragedy of it. And it's just a really fucking tough listen, this one. Nathan, I think you said that there were, or maybe both you said it, I don't know, but it has been said that there is like some like horror elements to like the music on display here, and like really a lot on this one, like with those screams, like they're pained, of course, and it hurts to listen to that because you can hear that pain in her voice, but it's frightening as well, like it's just intense, it's rough. It's like I yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have much more to say on it. It's just that this is a really intense track, and I'm grateful for having a bit of a preamble into it. But I don't think I was, fully ready to be that enthralled by it at this point in the album. But, sometimes you don't get to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure the screaming sections are really like horrifying, but I think like the really ambient parts are also
That too, yeah.
and like just the atmosphere they create, like there's like a sense of anxiety and like especially after hearing the first track,
Hmm.
when you know how noisy she can get, just like getting back to like the very beginning, she takes a breath and then it's just like soft again,
Yeah.
and like
To
you're almost like anticipating that noise to
mhm.
come back.
Yeah.
So
Which
like
To
is kind
even
of a bit of a recurring theme on here. We'll get to.
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. To
uh,
make another video game reference on our music podcast, I am reminded a lot listening to this album of the music of Silent Hill. Not really because they sound similar, but because they evoke a very similar reaction in me of just kind of like discomfort and anxiety and fear, I guess.
yeah. I think haunting
Yeah.
is definitely like a descriptor you could use for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it has a really anxious air to it. Um, and you can kind of tell that she's like containing her rage a little bit. Um,
Only just.
only just. Um, and then of course um not for the entire track. It does get noisy later on. Um, and the vocals are kind of buried here. Um, almost like it's like hard for her to speak up. And then yeah, if you look through them, it's her saying things that are not the origin of her depression, but um, you kind of start to question it because she's naming a lot of things that could very well be like that would to any normal person cause depression and anxiety and kind of like isolate you from the world. Um, and then of course the screaming parts come in, and the harsh noise comes back, and she's just letting it all out, and it hurts, but it's beautiful once again.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. This track opens with just like a glitchy, like harsh bit of noise right at the beginning, but it very quickly just opens back out into another ambient soundscape with,
I saw it more as like a transition from the opener.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's another soundscape kind of laden with ambient noise and a dissonant choir. The kind of creaking noises are back with what sounds like stairs and like change being shaken and like doors quietly closing and like a washing machine and all these other ambient real world noises that just ground it so viscerally in just this. It just sounds like someone's house, right? Like it's so viscerally personal. um just like this is what every day sounds like to her is kind of how I interpret it. The Especially in kind of contrast with the more impersonal sounding choir kind of brings it down to earth. The lyrics come in alongside some more wind chimes, which are seemingly just blowing. They aren't like given some kind of melody like they are in the first track. There is no rhyme or reason to any of it, and Xandra's voice is just creaky and quiet. It strains at times a little bit, but it's more strained in just like she's struggling to get out what she's trying to say. It's very just it's hard to listen to, right? Like and
and I love when artists do that. Like they don't mask the imperfections in their voice. Like they use it as a part of the art.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely what's going on here. and the soundscape behind her starts to overwhelm. There's a rising synth organ and some more and more dramatic choirs, and then around 4 minutes in, we reach what I honestly consider to be a musical like jump scare. Like I straight up like jumped when this happened for the first time. When I listened to it, I genuinely was just taken aback at how I could have not realized what was going to happen here. It was the soundscape that was built up to this point stays for the rest of the track, but it just gets so much more noisy as Xander's just shrieking in like absolute pain and fear. It's unlike anything I've ever heard on a record, and it's so just unhinged and depraved with a genuine like primal sense of fear and agony. And the once beautiful soundscape has just become like rotten with noise and this just pain that's overlaying all of it. And it's rough. This is the moment that like I cried listening to this for the first time. It's fucking wild. I don't really have anything else to say. This is an absolute like gut punch in every sense of the word. And it just kind of keeps going with Lay Down and Rot. What do you think about this, Wyatt?
Pure horror.
Yeah.
Like, just absolute unrelenting terror. That invokes a feeling in me of wanting to lay down and rot, which is also a very like 4chan sentiment to have on your very poignant album about very personal themes. Is that literally like the thing incels say? Like once they get black pilled, they lay down and rot. Am I getting too deep in the weeds on this?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm almost certain that is like a incel term. Maybe it's not being used as such here, but like that is like incel terminology is to lay down and rot.
I mean, I definitely see it as like self-deprecation, but I don't know if
Oh
it's been,
yeah,
like...
certainly.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's like if its origin is maybe from someone who doesn't respect her. Like it's when you've been like berated with insults or degraded so much that you start to internalize the hatred.
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, intended or not, like there's a very distinct usage of it here. In fact, I doubt that is a reference to incel culture, but I just wanted to make a note of that, I suppose. There are hardly any lyrics to this track, so I don't think I have too much to say on them. But the instrumental of it really paints a very vivid picture in my head because it is so ambient and has such good use of like dark sounds and such. I think of like it feels like I'm in a prison, and that is deep underground, and it's dark, and there are chains rattling and water dripping from the walls, and there's just no light anywhere, and you're trapped in a cell, and your only option left to you is to lay down and rot, or I suppose, as the lyrics do say, to just dissociate from your environment. And I guess some interpretation on the lyrics would be so. Yeah, the line "dissociation cannot cure love. I wish it could. I miss your white dress. Us. So, I think clearly there is feeling of depression following a breakup, which I guess goes against the origin of my interpretation on the origin of my depression. That could possibly. Well, no, I guess not. You could have two alternative readings that the "you" or "the origin of my depression" either refers to the ex who has, potentially scorned our speaker, or the speaker themselves calling themselves out for possibly ruining a relationship.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely like the breakup track, I suppose. It's just an incredibly dark and overwhelming version of that you don't tend to see in music very often. And I really admire the just the completely raw emotion on display here and throughout the album, of course. But it is it is so much. It's yeah, it's crushing is what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if maybe the white dress isn't literal.
Yeah,
Um, because it does show up on the previous track too. At the end of the
yeah.
title track, I miss your white dress. Every image of us is an image not of you.
Hmm.
Um, and then again, this track, like one of the only lines is, "I miss your white dress, us." Um,
I wonder.
so to me, while I was listening to this, and the only visual was the album cover,
Yeah,
my mind instantly went to like hospital gown.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I'm reevaluating now, and this is probably where you were going, but perhaps there wasn't a breakup after all. Perhaps this is love lost, through sickness and death potentially.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if maybe it's either a hospital gown or it's just um like literary symbolism of like um purity.
yeah, or both.
Like yeah, like a loss of innocence or a loss of childhood.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, this is very much letting out the pain. I think where Origin of My Depression was kind of struggling to contain it at the beginning and then let loose, I think this one is more um giving into it and kind of like laying down and letting the pain wash over and dissociating like yeah, just like not even trying to cope anymore, just um yeah, being overwhelmed by the pain and actually leaving your body because of it. um Another gorgeous track. um Getting heavier near the end once again. um I'm just astounded how like one person can paint all these soundscapes. I totally thought this was um a a band doing this, like a group. But I mean, having it as a solo project makes a lot more sense, like thematically, and makes each of these tracks hold a lot more weight, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another very harsh track, and it's probably our first track that I'd say is like very much that harsh noise that we'll continue to see on this record. Like it had to build to this point. It didn't just throw it on you. And I think that's a lot of my issue with a lot of noise music, is that when it's used effectively, it is incredible, like on this. But a lot
I
of the
think
time,
contrast is very important here.
absolutely. And I think my issue with trying to get into noise music a lot of the time is that it just throws it right in your face and it's like, this is what it is. And I just find that there's not too much that's overly interesting about that. Completely to the contrary of this, where it has this kind of harsh noise opening that leads into this really, really ominous ambient noise. This at this point, this album has reached some of its darkest moments. As the ambience is like gradually getting louder and quieter, and these random sounds are taking up most of the mix with this like clanging and rattling everywhere. There's some whispered and muttered vocals that are breaking through with the occasional segment of just like breathing right into the mic, and it just builds and wanes and builds back up until eventually it just breaks, and we're just once again assaulted by these screams that are even more harrowing than the last, and this time they're held together by practically nothing, as like these whispers and noise are just surrounding everything, and there's nothing else to focus on. It's just, and then there's occasionally these metallic vocals that just sound like she's screaming into like a tin can, and it's just caving in around her, and the noise is just slowly and then more harshly overwhelming everything, and it even like drowns out the screams before just releasing into the next track. It's incredible. How about Appalachian Joy, Wyatt? Track 4.
Oh, thank God, some relief. And not even that much of it. I mean, this is still a more depressing song than like the majority of like the music canon, but a necessary palate cleanser, I suppose, after Lay Down and Rot. Yeah, it just continually to be depressing, but just like this moment of relief after two incredibly intense tracks back to back, and more intense tracks to come afterwards. Yeah, this is, and also like as the midpoint of the album, this is a really smart placement for this track in terms of pacing. Yeah, it's again, it's heartbreaking, but it's has a more, I guess, standardly beautiful sound to it that allows me to experience some ease while listening to it. Yeah, so I don't know. I really appreciate this track more than anything. But it's quite wonderful, quite something, you know, uh, impressive to listen to, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have much to say on this one.
How about you, Peter?
Peter? Oh, there we go.
I could see this as like some mild relief.
Mild.
I mean,
Yeah.
for sure the whole album is like drenched in depression, but Lay Down and Rot is really like where it's unbearable and it's like screaming at you. And then I think Appalachian Joy is more like where you've become numb and yeah, you're like almost comfortable in that depression, and you're trying to um, accept it instead of fight it. Still very, very haunting, but in that like softer way that the title track was. Um, and she was like really um, um, these like rough lyrics, like I am porn unwatched, left on a drive untouched. Like it's equating the self to this object of um objectification that's just not being consumed. It's some really heartbreaking stuff. But it's a lot more like sonically digestible, I think, because it's so sparse. For the majority of this track, at least.
Mhm.
And I think it is a much needed breather. Even on an album that's this dark and this emotional, having a softer track after such a harsh track is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we start, with like a quick bit of respite with more wind chimes and then what sounds like kind of a harpsichord over more, I guess, relaxed soundscapes. This time permeated by what sounds kind of like staticky radio chatter throughout it. Gradually, we get more harps and more acoustic guitars and more ambient synths that build up to one of the more beautiful sounds on the record. Sandra's vocals are far more relaxed here, and while they're still like pain, it's far more of a deeply emotional pain than like a visceral physical pain that we've heard before. And but then we get this kind of fake out ending. And then we get to a second part where a beautiful chorus opens into just this wall of harsh noise that seems to be made up pretty much entirely of these distorted and pitched vocals. There's almost nothing synthetic about this, it seems to me, besides the effects that are being laden onto her voice. There's these barely audible just ruminations on facial surgery, and I would have come out at 8 years old. There's all these things that are just swirling around in this massive ball of just disorganized chaos before this next track, Please Don't Leave Me, which, Wyatt, I'll leave you off with this.
Oh, look at that. You got one in there. Nice little smooth transition. I'm going to pat you on the head for that. Very good. Do I have to talk about this one?
Yeah.
Well, there was the sweet and brief reprieve of Appalachian Joy, and then we fall back into the horror that is Please Don't Leave Me. It's a different kind of oppressive than some of the other tracks, where it is oppressing with the actual sound much more than the emotional reaction that sound elicits, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's distorted and it's corrupted in a very different way. I think it was you, Peter, who said that this album feels very haunted or haunting.
Yeah.
This track is possessed. And I think, that is in a very metaphorical sense, because in the story being told here, the impression I get, Genius seems to think that this track is reflecting on an abusive relationship, with the lyrics, I didn't do anything, yet you punish me like this. I didn't do anything wrong, yet you punish me like this. I disagree. I'm going to continue on with the interpretation we established before, and that this is an album with some focus on like maybe the death of a partner. So I take those lyrics and I interpret them as kind of the anger stage of grief, where our speaker feels like for some reason they have been punished by having their lover taken away from them, and maybe they feel angry at their partner for dying.
I don't know.
Or maybe they feel angry at God for taking them away or something.
I don't know if I see it as like a literal death. I think that
Yeah.
as well is more metaphorical of
Sure.
either a relationship with oneself. Again, it's hard for me to listen to it knowing that Xandra is trans, especially on later tracks.
Yeah, which is not
and
something
not
I
interpret
knew.
it as something tied to that.
Sure, certainly.
But also, obviously, that's not the only aspect of a trans person's life is being trans. So I don't want to construe it as that. I just see this very much as some kind of outlet for those feelings, especially because she so explicitly references and speaks on them on this album.
Yeah. So speaking of explicit things, we get a lovely little sound effect around the 25-second mark of a gun cocking, which pays off at the start of the next track, I suppose. But you know, we're in the latter half of the album now. This is where the downward spiral, I suppose, begins and for the most part ends at the same time. Which I think it's incredibly noteworthy how short this track is compared to everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the story being told about like how like the actions being portrayed on this track are so impulsive and so like unconsidered. You know, like clearly this person is just in a complete depressive rage, I suppose is the term. Like they're just they're done. It's over. Like they've yeah, at least that's their mentality, you know. So you get that sound effect cued in here. I'm not quite certain if the subsequent sound effect is at the end of this track or the beginning of the next. I think the beginning of the next, so I'll save discussing that for there. It's more relevant to that track as well. But yeah, this is definitely the emotional low point of the album, and it really shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it gets really intense. Um, kind of just like berates you with noise. Um, I want to quickly point out the transition between Appalachian Joy and Please Don't Leave Me. Um, Appalachian ends with this like really noisy part, which Please Don't Leave Me starts with. But between there's like a brief split second of like a breath or a
Just this
gasp.
gasp, and then it's
Yeah, which I just found like that like half second or whatever it was hit so hard. Um because it is like like a overwhelming amount of um stimuli when you're listening to harsh noise. And having that like really like desperate attempt to catch your breath, um it kind of like it spoke to me. I don't know. It was like a really emotional, really brief moment where like um it's as if she's drowning and then just like um gets her head out of water and then immediately gets pulled back down. Um just that little bit was heartbreaking to me, but the entire track, Please Don't Leave Me, is equally heartbreaking. Um for reasons that are different from Appalachian Joy because it's not as um gentle or as like fragile. This is like um this is the like the harsh noise meat of the album. And it hits really hard. You've got um everything distorted to the max. You got some really strong guitars that come in later on. Um And of course, these lyrics, which are once again hard for me to pick up on, but if you look at them, it's kind of asking why she's being punished. Please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. Um, we even have some redacted lyrics, which I'm not sure what that's redacted for.
I don't think those are words. Like,
Oh,
it's the
okay.
screaming at the beginning of the track, I think, is what that's referring to.
Okay, I was wondering if maybe somebody like wrote something inaccurate. Um, but yeah, this was when I said this album was painful to listen to. Um, I meant like emotionally, but this is like almost physically painful. Um, especially for people who don't listen to too much harsh noise. And like I've heard like the big albums from the genre, but I'm not like a connoisseur or anything. Um, and yeah, um, it does weigh on you. It wears you down. Um, and I think that's very much intentional, and it's almost simulating for the listener what her experience was like, um, being in this relationship, whether it's with another person or with herself, and struggling with um, mental health and um, suicide ideation and gender dysphoria and yeah, just all this really painful shit.
Yeah. This is the most harrowing moment on the record, I think. Um, just this sheer, just unrelenting industrial noise with like gunshot noises and the sounds of a million pins dropping, just enveloped in static amongst these just walls of distortion and just this screaming completely drowned out by all of it. There's like a couple moments of ambient noise that act of like a little bit of respite just before this disgustingly heavy ending segment with these pounding cinematic drums and these shrieked vocals just a, please don't hurt me, please don't leave me. It's rough. And then and even in what I described as some sort of respite, there's these super low, like octave down, hugely distorted, ominous vocals of the "I didn't do anything, yet you punish me like this." There is no escaping this track for any second of it, and it is the shortest track on the record, but it can feel like the longest. Just trying to get through it, it's hard. But even just like outside of that, musically, it is incredibly powerful. Like I was saying, that really heavy part at the end, that's not just emotionally heavy. Like that is just production wise and in its sound just incredibly musically heavy. Heavier than a lot of what I hear coming out of most metal nowadays. Like this is more appealing to me sonically even than a lot of metal, which is where I came from. Like the genre I came from getting into music. It's incredible. And it just all works towards this really oppressive feel, and really just harrowing, antagonized moment on this record. But it leads into, I think, my favorite track on the record. Why? What do you think about an angel of great and terrible light?
I think I agree with you. Hello?
Huh?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I was still muted for a second. Yeah. Yeah. This is I would describe this as the most acoustically pleasing track, I think. And it also is maybe the moment of happiness on here in a sense. I don't know. Well, let's address the elephant, I guess, which is that this track opens with the sound of a gunshot following the sound of the gun being cocked on the previous track. So the message is quite clear given that and the title, I believe, that this is the 8 minutes and 37 seconds following our speaker's suicide.
Or at least an attempt.
Or an attempt, I suppose, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's maybe worth noting that that Xandra is Australian, so would not have access to guns. So at least safe in that regard.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah,
I don't know. You can get a gun anywhere if you try hard.
it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like I said, I think this is the most acoustically pleasing track, and I think that's by design because I think I think the idea here is that this is the first time that our speaker is feeling any kind of relief, and that is incredibly heartbreaking as a sentiment, you know. Yeah, I just based on the title and the sound of this, I'm not a religious person, but the image it conveys into my brain is like a soul ascending into heaven of some kind, you know, because it sounds almost triumphant. I feel the actual music of the piece, even though the lyrics are kind of opposed to that in a way. You know, our first verse here is the grace of God is infinitely kind, even though he left the door ajar. Unconditional love, whilst mutilating, is a little too much love to bear. Are we mistakes? Are we going exactly to plan? Women are made in his image like a broken photocopier. You know, clearly, this is expressing a sentiment of like, you know, why God would you create transgender people? Why would you put me in the wrong body? You know, why would you do that to me? Which kind of I think brings back to the last track for me of that feeling of or that expression of what was it? I didn't do anything yet you punish me like this, you know, because this is somebody who you know is born this way, I suppose, is like it's from birth. You are born this way, you know. It is very much a feeling of being born into the wrong body, and so like you can't have done anything. You can't have like done something wrong to be born into the wrong body to deserve that. Not that anybody could ever deserve that, I suppose. And so I don't know. I listen to this track as like just a one like final expression of confusion and fear before kind of letting go. And I think as you get into like the refrain and I guess there's the choir section, you know, it's very much letting go because you just have the same repeated lyric over and over of I hope he has the stained cloth too, kind of evolving into just what has been transcribed as oohs and nas. um, which that's an interesting line too as well. I hope he has the stained cloth too. I have ideas about that, but I'm gonna maybe save that for either of you to pick apart, and then I'll give an interpretation, I suppose.
I mean, yeah, definitely everything you said. This does very much feel like a like a last resort kind of turning to some kind of higher power and um whether that's because someone's telling you to or because you literally can't think of anything else. Um and once again it's extremely painful. Um but I think this does hit a little bit harder than some of the other tracks because um maybe the song structure is a little more recognizable. To me, this was reminiscent of like something off "To Be Kind." Um, that might also have something to do with the title, which is kind of like "Angels of Light." I don't know. Um, but yeah, just the way that it has like this really steady drum beat and these like chilling bells or um xylophone. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Maybe Nathan, you could identify that instrument for me.
I think I wrote it as glass bells.
Glass
That's what it
bells would make
sounds like to
sense.
me.
Yes. So yeah, that like really steady beat, which is almost like marching or like inevitability, um, kind of invokes like a predestiny. Um, and then all these like this like religious imagery, um, but in a very non prescriptive way. It's more like a questioning of the higher power. And and rightly so. I mean, these are really like important questions. Um, but then they kind of just break into a repetition that's just yeah, she's not getting any answers. I hope he has this cloth stain too, over and over, and then just lots of vocalization without lyrics. Um, kind of like prayers going unanswered. And then like the other tracks on this album too, you get the noisy bit at the end where she almost just gives up, and then all this emotion just washes over her. Um, I think this is not quite the longest track, but it's pushing 9 minutes there, um, and I think it's really impressive um how well put together this track is for being 8.5 minutes long and not really wasting a single second of that. Like it's just
It really
building
doesn't
and
feel it.
building. No, it's yeah, it does not lose your attention for a single second. Um I think it's really impressive, especially with a project as um noisy and experimental as this. Um yeah, definitely a highlight on the album. Um and also like a turning point thematically.
Yeah. So I don't know if I quite agree with either of you about the thematics of this track. Um, this track absolutely reads to me as, and very obviously, her relation between being transgender and also presumably some kind of childhood faith or religion.
Could we real quick, just because I think somehow we haven't, just state the name of the track?
I said it, an angel of great and
Oh,
terrible
did you?
light.
Okay, okay. All right. I wasn't sure if we had or not. And for anybody
Which is maybe
following along at home,
why it first reminded me of Swans is because Angels of Light is the other Michael Gira project.
But it definitely is that I see this as a far more triumphant moment than either of you, though, because I see this as because of how musically coherent, especially relative to everything else up to this point, how musically coherent this is, it reads to me as coming to terms with that depression, with these feelings, with everything, and learning to put it to a more healthy use. And obviously that's not eradicating it, because that's impossible, but it is learning to live with it and use it to help push yourself and drive yourself forward. The way you say this rhythmic drum beat is driving the track forward, I see that as very representative. And even when towards the end we get these screams, we get these big industrial shots of noise, it's far more constrained. It's far more like she's using it as a tool to make a song, rather than this explosion of emotion that we had before, of just unbridled pain and just viscera. I feel like this is...
She's found the outlet or the structure for her pain.
Yeah, or at least she's able to manipulate it into a far more cohesive tool in her life.
Maybe I was thrown off by the title, because Great and Terrible Light, the fact that she specified terrible makes it seem like it's
well, so that's the other part. So that's just what I mean musically. Lyrically, I think this is some of my favorite poetry ever on this track, these lyrics. And I will say, so as someone who was raised religious, I am presumably not why, but I was homeschooled for other reasons, particularly the school system here sucks.
They were too embarrassed to let him out of the house.
Sorry,
so all he does is listen to 100 gex and UBOA records. We can't let this kid go anywhere.
God. But like a lot of this does resonate in some way. So this seems to me like letting go of that far more than what you were saying about accepting it and either as a final last ditch attempt or something like that, especially because, and I'm kind of cheating here because I've heard some of her other projects, but on her last EP there's a track that is, I kind of see it as a bit of a sequel to this, both sonically and thematically, called God Unbounded. And there's a repeated lyric that is literally just Unbounded? I hate you, God. Yeah.
Is it about you?
Yeah. The lyric is literally I hate you, God, just repeated over and over. And it, so I really don't
Okay. Tell me that's not a Swans lyric.
It kind
Come
of
on. It kind of is.
But even before that EP came out, I always read this as more like, I'll just read them all off. Like, it's the grace of God is infinitely kind, even though he left the door ajar. So it's basically just poking holes in the mantra that God is infinitely kind and infinitely good, and all that unconditional love, whilst mutilating is a little too much love to bear, are we mistakes? So presumably talking about being transgender and how that is seen as so hugely wrong in the Christian religion and in most religions, whilst also saying that God doesn't make mistakes. So what gives? Are we going exactly to plan? Women are made in his image like a broken photocopier, which takes on, and this is something I'll add it to the list, but I really think you two should check out the album Caligula by Lingua Ignota. It's different but very similar to this, and that album...
I've heard that album.
Oh, you've heard it, okay.
Oh yeah, of course.
So that album tackles what I'm about to say far more in depth than I will, but the women are made as image like a broken photocopier. I read that as very much taking on just how misogynistic a lot of religion and religious people are.
Oh yeah.
And how we're all made in his image and yet X. So, and then verse 2 is where I think the triumph starts to break through, where she's saying, no, I'm not going to apologize for my quote unquote sins, because I'm in a body that according to you was pruned in a way that it withers, not pruned in a way that I grow. I was, if your God is real, if your God did all of this, then he fucked me over, right? And I'm not going to be sorry for that. And it's incredibly powerful, and I think I hope he has this stained cloth too. I don't I've been thinking about this lyric since I heard this song for the first time, and I always have a different interpretation of it. Right now, how I kind of read it is in some way related to how she had to get surgeries to become who she is. This stained cloth, presumably stained with blood. Again, this is still a little bit cheating because I've heard her other projects, but there's a track on the Absolute. The first track is just called The Surgery. Again, I assume that's tied in. None of this is definitive, but this is my interpretation of what I feel like this track is saying, or what it's trying to say. But yeah, and like you were saying, it's just sonically beautiful. There's this pounding and slightly rattly bass drum opening to an acoustic guitar just strumming really slow and drawn out chords over this off-kilter but beautiful glass chime. And Xandra's singing here is, for once, kind of classifiable as singing, and it's genuinely just so moving. She's got backing vocals at some points, which are also just incredibly beautiful, and the lyrics here, just like I was saying, some of my favorites of all time. And yeah, like this noise starts to break through, or try at multiple points, but it's repeatedly pushed back. It makes it close a couple times before the end, but it's always held back until towards the end when it finally gets through, but she's ready for it. She lets it through on her command, and I think that's just incredibly empowering. Like, listening to this alongside these lyrics, this second verse, it's just fantastic. This is my favorite track on the record, one of my favorite songs I've ever heard. That's what I have to say about that track. We've got one more left. Wyatt, close this off, or not actually, because then Peter and I are gonna have a turn. But
No,
okay,
I'm the last one to speak. My
Start
word
off,
is
start
final.
off the closing off. Begin the end.
Big chungus of a track.
What?
Nice 11-minute track. Big chungus. I don't know. I'm just trying to lighten the mood.
Yeah, it's warranted at this point.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little bit emotionally drained just talking
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah. I think so the final track, Misspent Youth, I think it's very interesting in its relationship to the album, because it's substantially the longest track. And it's the last track, and it, as the last track, it follows a track that I feel to be much more conclusive. So the way I kind of look at this album is like 6 tracks and an epilogue, I suppose, or like an afterword of sorts. I really I feel like there is a through line of a story weaving in between the first 6 tracks, and I feel like this one is more of like kind of a reflection on those themes, or even just like putting the story aside and a little more of like a direct conversation or like a confessional of some kind. And you know, I don't know the artist personally, so I don't know how much of this is real, how much of this is based in reality, but sort of, you know, twisted for the purposes of art. Um, but it just this track in contrast with what has come before it feels different in a very distinct way. Not just in like its tone or its length, but the subject matter even. Like it's very I mean there's still metaphor at play, but like it is kind of telling a very direct story that is related, of course, but just distinct from the other ones. You know, the very first few lines, I kiss you and I can taste the girlhood I never had. I was dead for 26 years. I feel so stupid for waiting. That I am so close to giving up. It's ontological fate. Every transition is done too late. And especially that line, you have like this, I guess, vocal layering effect on the word late that is reminiscent of the screaming and raw emotion that we've heard before on the album. Just to really hit home the damage that is done by prolonging, you know, this person being able to truly express themselves. And that hurts to hear, you know. I listen to a track like this and like I wish I could have helped. I wish I could have done something, you know. And that's, you know, as much as this is like based in reality or not, you know, there's not anything I could do for the fictional speaker on this track or the real person who wrote it. And that's, you know, that's kind of neither here nor there. I guess it's just that's the reaction I go through listening to this, is just feeling so sorry that I or really anybody could have like, you know, had like a time machine to go back and could like prevent this from happening. You know, as beautiful as this album is, I wish it didn't exist. You know, I wish it didn't have to exist. I guess maybe is a better way of saying that. Because the the clear kind of suffering that was repurposed into something so like profound as this album, you know, you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. So I yeah, I'm really sorry that this exists, and listening to the story that is you know, on display here is just it's very painful. And I just, you know, this being the final track, I just would like to establish that like I really admire and appreciate the energy that went into taking all of that hurt and pain and turning into something that, you know, maybe somebody could listen to and relate to and feel seen by, and you know, be validated in, even if it is still painful to relive, I guess.
Yeah, we talked
Yeah.
about this a little bit on our Down There episode about like
Yeah.
um kind of therapy through creation
Yeah.
and like working through your emotions and like turning your pain into art. Um and yeah, you can tell that the process wasn't easy, but it's a much healthier way to um, approach those emotions than through um, substance abuse or like self-harm or a myriad of other ways that people do deal with these things. Um, when you said this song sounded like an epilogue, um, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I kind of see what you mean. It's by far the softest track. Um, as far as I know, it doesn't really have any of those harsh noise elements. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, because it is 11 minutes.
There's
I don't.
the big like distorted bass notes around halfway, which I think are incredible. But they are the closest thing to noisy this track gets.
Yeah. But compared to the other tracks, it is very
Hmm.
stripped back and gentle even. Um, but yeah, if you look at this as an epilogue, um, and you look at detransitioning as a sort of prologue, um, it does have a sort of like cyclical nature to it, because detransitioning does start with a similar sound. Um, but this misspent youth does come after going through all of these really heavy and um, uh, horrifying tracks.
And I think
Um,
I'll cut you off for a second there because I do
yeah,
think this does like you're right in saying that it sounds like it could be cyclical, but this track definitely ends, and it ends in a very final sounding way. Um,
yes. Um, the point I was going to make is that um, if we're looking at this as a snapshot of someone's depression, depression is not something that most people cure. You kind of just like find ways to live with it. Um, and so I think, yeah, going through all the emotions on this album, especially if we're going with your reading of the last track, Nathan, um, as sort of like um, harnessing that pain and like turning it into a weapon yourself. Um, yeah, this is more like this last track is accepting the shitty things and like more like straightforward talking about these issues and yeah, I was dead for 26 years and every transition is done too late, but it's a cliche, but better late than never, right? Um so I think this song, like sonically, it is still very um emotional and not in a triumphant way. This is still very painful, but it's finding a way to um, live with that pain. And I think this is one of my favorites on the album. Uh, I think just because it is so um, gentle and vulnerable in contrast to some of the harsher stuff we've heard up until this point. And yeah, I wouldn't wish this album without this track. I think it's really important to have this, even if you do see it as
Oh.
an
Oh,
epilogue.
absolutely. Like
Yeah,
I do think it's a vital part. I mean, it's a quarter of the album.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I just it feels very distinct from the rest of it in a way that definitely services the rest of it, and I think they inform each other, but distinct nonetheless, I suppose.
yeah. And I think this is the most honest that she's been on the album too. And this is really like confronting these things. And at the very end, she says, "Hell is fine if I'm a woman there too, and hell is my truth." Um, which I think goes back to the themes on An Angel of Great and Terrible Light, where she's struggling with these religious teachings that she's heard, and with who she feels and knows who she is inside, and she's finally accepting, like, okay, if what you say is true and I am going to hell, I guess I'll live with that, because her identity is more important than um, what the religious people in her life are saying that she should be.
Yeah. Yeah, for the longest time, I didn't really understand this track's placement or importance. I still loved it, but like it did seem very separate, like you're saying, Wyatt. But as I've listened to it more, as it's become one of my favorite albums of all time, it is incredibly essential to this listen, and it is very, like you were saying, it is informed by what's happened so far in this record, in this kind of story that's being told. If Angel is this huge and quite like almost triumphant decision of this is how I'm going to live, then this is the more quiet ruminations on the fallbacks of that, and also the fallbacks of not having come to that conclusion sooner. Yeah, sonically there's so much going on. It's incredibly long. Her almost inaudible, super whispered vocals are underpinning these massive piano chords that span the entire keyboard, and then there's what sounds like feet shuffling and dishes clanking, and there's rain falling outside. There's this softly finger-strummed guitar making up part of the soundscape alongside these ambient highs that are... This whole sound is really reminiscent of some of the more emotionally affecting moments on a Godspeed You Black Emperor album. I'm never going to shut up about that band, but it's genuinely true.
It's okay. They're your Animal Collective. I get it.
I think the first leg of this track is essentially just an ambient piece, and it's so gorgeous. Especially because this is part of what got me into ambient music as well. Is just these formless soundscapes on this track, but on a lot of the tracks. But then we get this just absolutely devastating bass note that just eats up the whole mix, and we get these far more haunting and like amelodic chatterings of pianos and chimes, and these harsh drawn out breathing replacing the lightly sung vocals before, and then rising to this absolutely gorgeous choir underlined by just these incredibly distorted but no less driving and melodic bass hits that soon like calm into just this fully incorporated piece of the instrumentation, alongside more loose piano playing and far more front and center vocals. This is where we get some of these more confrontational lyrics, this story that's being told. The soundscape is simultaneously really sparse and simultaneously very lush, with its incredibly loose and it's and like these faint and gorgeous backings just dipping in and out that give this sense of almost impermanence. It's incredibly loose and very lamenting, and while the crescendos are few and far between, and it's never as massive as on the previous tracks, it's such an integral moment on here, and it's so representative to me, of Xandra coming to terms with her depression, her anxieties, and learning to live with them in a way that, while it's not ideal, it's nowhere near the self-destructive and auto-cannibalistic horrors that it resulted in before on this record. There's something just incredibly beautiful about how formless and long this track plays out, and it's hard to imagine this record without it. The track in the album ends just incredibly intimately, as all the kind of unnecessary flourishes of the instrumentation start to fall away, and it comes back down to just Xandra and her piano, and it just ends with that line of "Hell is my truth," and it's super powerful. Like you were saying, the line "Hell is fine if I'm a woman there too," or that whole first segment. It's powerful. And I think that's what I would say for this album as a whole. We'll get into final thoughts in a second. Wyatt, hit me with your final thoughts, your conclusion.
I think I need to lie down.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been lying down this whole time.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not been.
I finished a couple glasses of wine too.
Oh, good. I wish I had some wine on hand. That would be nice. Yeah. Final thoughts. I haven't been this emotionally disturbed by an album since my teenage dream has ended.
Oh my god.
But for the right reasons this time.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This is like it's perfectly awful, I guess, is like the way I would somewhat like facetiously describe it. It's just hell. Like it's not a good time, but like I enjoyed the time that I spent with it, and I'm grateful for it, even though I wish it didn't exist. You know, I have a lot of like contradictory reactions, I suppose, to this album. But above all, I really admire the artistry of it and I guess just the boldness of it, the fearlessness of it as well, I should say. It's just just an incredible work. How about you, Peter?
It's definitely a journey, which I think all good albums are.
Mm-hmm.
It did a fantastic job of immersing me in everything UBOA was going through, and yeah, I think the last time I was hurt this much by an album was A Crow Looked at Me, which I heard when it came out, so that was years ago. Fantastic introduction to this artist. Definitely going to be checking out some of her other releases. She's got 7 albums under her belt already, which is impressive in a decade. And Nathan, you were saying some EPs too I should check out?
Definitely check out her last EP. Fuck, what did I forget? The Flesh of the World. It's one of my favorite projects from last year.
Cool. Definitely going to do that. But also just like as someone in the trans community, it's nice to see artists outside of electronic and pop, which is kind of where you see trans artists the most.
That and punk.
Maybe I don't listen to enough punk to know that. So yes, while this is really painful and disturbing and haunting, in a way it's refreshing because it's great to see these artists and these people who've been kind of ignored by music publications and the industry in general for a long time, getting recognitions in a range of genres, especially for a project like this that addresses these issues so vocally. Um, so yeah, not a fun listen, but an important listen, and um, a powerful listen.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning and a couple times throughout, this is one of my favorite and one of the most important albums I've ever heard. It was super influential for not just my taste in music, but also just me as a person, and just learning to live with a lot of things. And it's not fun, but I have come back to this album far more than I would have expected to from my first impression of This Is Horrifying. There's something just so beautiful about how emotionally instructive it almost is. Like, while it absolutely feels like how Xander was pulling herself through some of this and learning to deal with some things, it's also just so helpful for learning to deal with those things as a listener. And I can't respect this album enough for what it does. I absolutely love this thing. It's kind of tradition at this point. We'll do our favorite tracks and a rating, but like, this is entirely non-binding. This album is so much of a singular piece that it's leaving stuff out is
I mean, especially on like a 7-track album, like
exactly.
you're only emitting 2 tracks.
Yeah. And also, like, with something so just emotionally vulnerable and raw, it's hard to giving it a number rating feels reductive. So I want to preface whatever we say next with the quality of this music is still secondary to what it does. So Wyatt,
Yes.
do it.
What am I doing?
Your tracks and rating.
It feels more reductive than it ever has
Yeah.
to do that for this one. I'm gonna, how about this? Since there are so few, I'm just gonna say that my favorite track is An Angel of Great and Terrible Light. And that beyond that, I really enjoy Appalachian Joy. I don't know. Enjoy is not even the right word. I particularly admire Appalachian Joy and the origin of my depression, I guess. And I think this is a perfect album in the sense that it does exactly what it's trying to do, and is just an incredibly successful piece of art. And if you really want me to reduce that to something, it's a 10, I guess.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, I'd say also An Angel of Great and Terrible Light. Absolutely. Um, Misspent Youth. Of course. Please Don't Leave Me. Lay Down and Rot. And the opener, Detransitioning. Yeah, I also feel kind of guilty for reducing this to a number, but I'm gonna give it a strong 8.
All right. I already said Angel of Great and Terrible Light is my favorite. But beyond that, Origin of My Depression, Please Don't Leave Me, Appalachian Joy, and Detransitioning. And this is a 10. This is incredible. Yeah, I guess that's gonna do it.
That's a podcast.
That's a podcast. One of our shorter ones as of late.
Sad podcast.
Saddest podcast ever.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Are we gonna pick the next album?
Do we want to pick?
Yeah.
So our next album that we're gonna cover is the last
Right.
of our
but I mean,
Death Grips albums. Do we want to pick next
after Year of
week's?
the Snitch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Kind of lighten the mood a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Do something fun.
All right. Let me pull this up. I closed it.
You idiot.
Yeah, I know.
Baka Nathan.
Oh, we got one that's gonna be on a discography. We're probably gonna end up doing, so I'll skip that.
Okay, yeah.
Is it an Animal Collective record?
No.
Ah,
And now we
do
got
it.
In the Court of the Crimson King, which we've already done.
delete that.
Yeah. Why did you think? It's another fucking discography. Okay. Fucking hell.
Can you
I'll
not
pick-
remove albums from the
You
chart?
can.
can do
You
that.
absolutely can.
Oh man. Okay. I'm excited for this,
Is it
but
another sad one?
yeah.
Astro Lounge.
Oh god, such a sad year.
No, I got A Promise by Shushu.
I'm not
Okay,
familiar.
okay.
It's another one of my favorites.
I mean, Wyatt, if you're not familiar with Shushu, that's a good one to start with.
Yeah, that is where I started.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll do that next week. Next
Not
episode
my
will
favorite,
be Year
but,
of the
but it's
Snitch.
a good one.
Yeah, next episode will be Year of the Snitch by Death Grips. That'll round out our thing, and then at the end of that, we'll be giving our overall thoughts on Death Grips as a concept. We'll be doing our ranking of the albums and our top 10 tracks, and then we'll pick our next discography to go into. So we'll look forward to that.
Yes.
I'm gonna cut this recording and take a nap.
Cry.
Take a nap at 12:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. See you around.
That's a podcast.
That's a
Catch you on the
podcast.
flip side.
Bye.